What is deontological ethics? Previously, this class focused on consequentialism, which determined that morality came from the consequences of an action. But with deontological ethics, determining morality instead comes from a sense of duty and obligation towards a set of principles, hence its other name of duty ethics. My name is Yusuf Soharno, and welcome to my presentation on Lesson 5. The main thing about duty ethics is, well, duty. This idea that you're bound by something greater, whether it's a familiar duty to take care of your family, a civic duty to pay your taxes, or an employment duty to work for the company. For many, these examples are probably second-hand nature to them. It's just the natural way of life since they were born. But why is this the case? This is where my boy Immanuel Kant comes in. According to Kant, most moral systems fail in justifying their moral judgment as it relies too heavily on subjective considerations. Instead, Kant proposed a moral system which was based on a categorical imperative, a sort of constant rule in the universe that everyone must follow. Within this categorical imperative, he comes up with two formulations. The first formulation states that act only in accordance with that maxim through which you can, at the same time it will that it will become a universal law. Basically, there is an objective moral maxim that everyone must follow, which are not tied by any subjective considerations. The second formulation states that act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. And basically, each and every one of us is an individual with free will. If you respect that free will, you're doing fine. But once you trample upon that free will, you are then acting in a subjective manner which violates the first formulations. But just like any other moral frameworks, this too had its own fair share of criticism. One of the main criticisms of Kant's ethics took form was in the situation of lying to a murderer. Imagine that there was someone running away from a murderer. You saw where they were headed, or maybe you even offered to hide the person inside your house. And then the murderer shows up and asks you where that person went. Based on the formulations of Kant's ethics, and even Kant himself when asked the same question, you should not lie about the person's whereabouts, as lying would be violating the universal maxim. But most of us here would agree that lying to the murderer would be the ethical thing to do. So now, the question is, where do we draw the line between following our duties and disregarding them? As noted earlier, you have an employee duty to work for and follow the company's order, but there are times when following the company's order lies in stark contrast to the interests of the public. One such action an employee might take is through whistleblowing, or the act of disclosing information about an organization's unethical activities through unofficial means. Usually, when a problem arises, you report it to your supervisor or the department in charge of those issues. However, sometimes those in charge might not seem to care about it. They might even actively disrupt you in order for you to forget about the whole situation entirely. One such case happened with Virginia Edgerton. During the 1970s, there was a project underway called PROMISE, which was a computer system that would provide the information needed for lawyers. This information included details such as the court hearing dates, addresses of persons of interest, and several other important case details. At the same time, there was a similar program that was already in use by the New York Police Department called Sprint. Sprint worked by using a remote terminal that would have the current location of various patrol cars. Once the dispatcher had the address, Sprint would then find the closest patrol unit and alert them of the call. This is where Virginia Edgerton comes into place. Edgerton was an experienced computer system analyst hired by the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council Committee as a consultant on this project. When Edgerton learned about the initial proposal for PROMISE to use the same remote terminal as Sprint, she brought up the issue of PROMISE potentially reducing the effectiveness of Sprint. However, her supervisor disagreed with her and her recommendation of a study being conducted. Seeing as the issue she was trying to bring up was also backed by the opinions of IEEE, she decided to send the study proposal directly to the members of the committee. Edgerton was soon fired for insubordination by her supervisor as she disobeyed her duty and of communicating with her supervisor first before any information was sent up the chain of command. Another example is with the case of Richard Levenier. Since the 1980s, Richard Levenier had worked for the Department of Energy as a nuclear security specialist. He was responsible for testing the security measures at various facilities that housed nuclear weapons. But towards the 1990s, a few of the tests he conducted resulted in conditions that were quite poor. Some of these tests resulted in the facility's security forces sustaining 50% or more casualty rates, yet under the current DOE regulations, they were considered a success. He brought up his concerns to his superiors, but while his second-level supervisor agreed with him, his immediate supervisor disagreed. This supervisor would continue to resist Levenier's finding, even directing him to stop. But this was just a prequel of what was to come. In 1999, Levenier provided technical assistance for an evaluation of security at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. During his time there, he came across a report by the Office of Inspector General that highlighted some of the same concerns Levenier had. By the time Levenier obtained the copy in April of 2000, the DOE had already determined that the report was unclassified by March 29th of 2000. Based on this information, Levenier would ultimately leak a copy of the report to the media in an attempt to bring awareness to the issue. In doing so, the DOE would instead launch an investigation on Levenier and eventually strip him of his security clearance while also indirectly causing him to transfer, or demotion, really. Already, we have seen two instances of people trying to go against the duty of an organization and face repercussions because of it. So, is this a sign that maybe we should just shut up and listen to our superiors? Clearly there's no need to take any further action since our organization definitely has the public interest in mind. As engineers, we are responsible for the construction and oversight of some pretty important projects, whether it's maintaining systems dedicated to providing crucial information to first responders or maintaining the security of a nuclear facility. The actions we take have significant consequences to the public. If there is a universal maximum when looking at duty ethics, then that maximum should be ensuring the needs of the public. In that sense, when the duty of your organization begins to neglect the public, that is when one should step up and disobey their duty. Both Edgerton and Levenier went through official channels in order to voice their concerns about potential issues, yet in each case, upper management went on to outright deny their voices. What's even worse is that in both cases, some sort of retaliatory action have been committed by their respective organizations. The actions that these two have taken prevented a possible accident from occurring, which would have disrupted the lives of many, but instead of honoring their actions, they were punished. Especially in the case of Levenier, who would eventually file a disclosure to the United States Office of Special Counsel, a federal agency who is in charge of investigating and safeguarding the protection of whistleblowers who receive reprisal from their respective agency. After 4 years, the OSC would eventually recognize the validity of Levenier's concern and determine the actions taken by the DOE were illegal under the Whistleblower Protection Act. But still nothing had been done about Levenier's circumstance, as the OSC didn't have the jurisdiction to object the DOE's action. Eventually, Levenier, along with several other whistleblowers and other prominent legal institutions, testified at the House Subcommittee on National Security, Emerging Threats, and International Relations on the topic of lack of protections whistleblowers currently face. Now, all of this might seem as if it doesn't really matter to us. The examples I have shown could very well just be cases of a lack of regulations. But that's the thing. Regulations can only do so much until a malicious actor starts to bend them. Or even worse, what's stopping a malicious actor from just ignoring regulations? This is why whistleblowing and this overall idea of disregarding your duty becomes so important. The actions an engineer takes during a project's phase helps serve as a counteractive balance to an organization's neglect. Even though you might experience some internal negative backlash, the positives of standing up for the public's benefit outweighs the immediate repercussions. This applies not only to just engineering, but society as a whole. As Martin Luther King once wrote in a letter from Birmingham jail, an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust, and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice, is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law. Thanks for watching my presentation on Lesson 5.